few years ago, I was really struggling to quit porn, and I had all these different ways of dealing with a relapse. And I even went on YouTube and would talk about how to deal with a relapse. Now, back then, I hadn't undergone a real education on addiction recovery, and to be honest with you, I hadn't really quit porn myself anyway. I was in quite a bad place with it, and I thought I was doing quite well because I'd get on some long NoFap streaks, but I hadn't actually dealt with the compulsion correctly. Now in this video, I want to talk about 3 tips for dealing with a relapse, but before we do that, it's really important to realise what we shouldn't do and what can be incredibly detrimental after engaging with this compulsive behaviour. So the first thing I used to always say is that you need to figure out what went wrong.
The first one would be to figure out what happened, understand quite deeply what went wrong.
Now, the reason that this just isn't very helpful is that the reason you're engaging in this compulsive behaviour is because your mind has become involved in a psychological, emotional dependency on a mind mood altering experience. Now, there isn't really anything else to figure out. The reason you are engaging with porn is because your mind is addicted to porn. You have addicted neural pathways, and so you are going to look at porn until you deal with those addicted neural pathways. Now, what I used to do in the past is I'd try and figure out the reason. And the reason for me in the past, I used to think it was things like maybe feeling lonely, feeling frustrated with myself, lacking in confidence. Maybe I thought I'd had a really stressful week at work, or I'd say, oh, it was because I spent too much time on social media, things like that.
Figure out what you can do next time, because if you've been triggered by something, it's likely you're going to be triggered by that same thing again, or figure out a way of not being triggered by that thing that you were triggered by.
And that is my second point. In the past, I used to always focus on trying to figure out the trigger, understand the trigger, and avoid any trigger. So triggers for me in the past were things like social media. But again, as I say, what I now have come to understand is that the addicted part of the mind creates the triggers. You cannot escape them. When you're in a compulsive behaviour, the mind is going to create all of this desire, no matter how much you try and avoid it. And so again, that advice I used to provide of avoiding the trigger is just completely pointless, because you're in a compulsive behaviour, you're in an addiction, and a compulsive behaviour is one where it's relentless. It's always going to sort of be there until you actually address it properly. The final thing I used to always say is that what you want to do is learn from your relapses.
I think often a relapse can be an incredible opportunity to learn and grow, and then develop and change ourselves and improve ourselves.
This is something I see all over the internet nowadays. Relapse is part of recovery. There's a lesson in every relapse. Again, this is nonsense. It's something I used to believe. It's something I used to even say on this YouTube channel. But it just isn't accurate. And the reason for that is, again, there's nothing to learn, because the only thing you need to know is that you right now don't know how, because you've not been taught, you don't know how to deal with your compulsive desire. Once you learn how to deal with compulsive desire, there isn't anything else to learn, because every time you have a compulsive desire, you will think it through using a script or whatever tool you choose to deal with that compulsive desire. And so there's nothing else to learn. You're sorted at that point. So learning from relapsing, why is that idea of learning from relapsing, why is that concept so detrimental, and why did that keep me stuck in an addiction for so many years? The reason this is so bad is that if you think that you can learn from a relapse, nothing's ever going to change, because every single time you choose to engage, and it is a choice, you're just going to think, well, the reason I engaged is because of this, and this, and now I've learned from that, so I'm not going to engage next time. But as I say, this desire is compulsive, and it is dealing with those urges that's the only problem. The triggers are not the problem, because the triggers are created by the addicted part of the mind, and you change the addicted part of the mind by rewiring addicted neural pathways through thinking it through with a very specific tool. So if we think that there's something to learn from every relapse, when are we ever going to stop choosing to engage? Every single time we engage, we're going to say, oh, well, at least I learned something, and then you're just going to carry on in a circle, just going round and round, engaging, learning, thinking you're making progress, when really you're just stuck in an addiction. And the learning from a relapse is actually the junkie thinking that's going on. that in itself is the excuse, the rationalization, the justification, is that, oh, it's okay to engage because at least then I'll learn something. And then you're just going to keep on learning and engaging and staying in this addiction indefinitely. Nothing's ever going to actually change. That is the route I could have gone down for the next 10 years. I'd already been in that cycle for about 9 years. And then I met my mentor, Mary Paulus, who's worked in addiction recovery for a long, long time. And she taught me the Beyond Compulsion method. So the final thing I want to talk about is how to actually deal with relapsing. Because, as I say, most of the internet information is going to be very, very detrimental. And it kept me stuck in addiction for so much longer than I needed to be. So what I would advise, like the 3 tips I'd give would be, the first one is to write down how you feel. Now that's probably talked about by a fair few people, journal. But what I would do is actually really focus on the downsides instead of like trying to take away all these lessons and meaning. There's nothing really meaningful in choosing to engage in a compulsive behaviour that destroys your life. Instead, you want to write down how it's actually impacting you. So for me, it would be things like feeling shame, feeling frustrated with myself, low confidence, low energy, feeling mentally exhausted, just tired and disconnected, not wanting to socialise, feeling just genuinely like deeply frustrated with myself. Like there's this thing I'm trying to stop so badly, and yet I keep on doing it, and it just so I just write down all of that stuff. The reason you're going to write that down is because that's going to be useful to you in the future, because the next time you want to engage, and you are going to want to engage, no matter how much a part of your brain says you're not going to want to engage again, because you are, because your mind's addicted, and that's what we need to deal with. The reason this is useful to write down is because then when you do want to engage in the future, you can go back to this list. Like you can actually read all of these things that are going on for you right now, having engaged, and you can go, okay, so I can engage, but what's going to happen is I'm going to feel all of this again. Like that's the reality. Like if you choose to engage, well, this is what's going to happen because you've experienced that. So that's why it's really important to write down how you're feeling and not hold back. Like, you don't want to be overly dramatic, but I would just be as honest as possible in writing down how you feel after engaging. And that's going to put you off wanting to engage again in the future. Or maybe, you're still going to want to engage, I suppose, but it's going to help you realize that, if you do that, these are the consequences. And we need to know what the consequences are. So the next thing I would do is identify the excuse that led to this behavior happening. As I say, when you're in an addiction and you have this compulsive behavior, the addicted part of the mind is going to come up with all this justification, all these excuses, rationalizations to engage. And so we really need to identify those excuses. We need to realize, okay, well, what was the thought pattern that led to me thinking it would be okay to engage? For a lot of people, it's going to be, if I look once, it's okay. For me in the past, it'd be things like, I'm not going to actually fully masturbate. I'm not going to orgasm. So I'd kind of trick myself into believing that I could control it, so that I'd, just be going on Instagram or just going on YouTube or Twitter and just scrolling and seeking out something sexual. And I tricked myself into believing that I was going to stop at a certain point, when what I ended up actually doing is just edging and sort of building up all of this desire and more, because every time you engage a little bit, that actually creates more desire to engage more. And so I'd do that, and then eventually I kind of was in a position in my mind where I was well, I've already engaged, so I may as well. So that'd be the other junky thought or excuse, is I've already engaged, so I may as well continue. So identify whatever excuse it was. For some people it may be I've just had a stressful week at work, or I was really tired. Things like that. So identify whatever bullshit excuse you have for yourself. Maybe write that down and realize okay, well, that was an excuse, and take responsibility and own up to the fact that is just the addicted part of the mind. There's nothing wrong with you. You're in an addiction, and they're the sort of thoughts that are going to come up for you. And then the final thing is, put this rational part of your mind back in control. How do you do that? Well, I'd say the first 2 things are going to really help you. Identifying these excuses and writing down how you feel is going to help put the rational part of your mind back in control. But I'd also seek out more education on how addiction actually works, understanding the addicted part of the mind, all the junky thoughts that come with having an addicted part of your mind. And you can do that through this channel here, Beyond Compulsion Academy. It's a new channel that we're shifting over to, and we also have a podcast which is coming out soon called Help Is Here, and we're going to be sharing a lot of advice and help which is based on Mary Paulus's 35 years in addiction recovery, and it's based on my journey of 9 years trying to do NoFap and failing to quit a porn addiction. Hopefully that can really help you. There's also going to be a link in the description to a compulsion test that's going to help you figure out if you do have a compulsive behaviour, and you're going to get a score from me out of 100. So thanks a lot for watching this video. Hopefully it helps. Hopefully we can get you to a position where you never choose to relapse again, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.